Today, I want to discuss how I failed as a self-taught software engineer, and this will be sort of an unfiltered exposure of my experience attempting to break into the industry over the last 4 years, and how I technically did break in, but by my own standards, I've failed in that regard. I simply haven't achieved the result that I would consider validates all the hard work up to this point. What you have to understand about this industry is that it's an upside down pyramid. And the demand is always going to be skewed toward the most experienced developers. That would be the top of the pyramid, the meatiest part. And I see this daily in my job search grind. I've sent out over 1,000 applications since last October and had 20 or so interviews. And I've noticed that I almost exclusively get interviews for senior positions. And the result of this is that I'm genuinely unqualified for a large number of the interviews I get as a mid-level engineer with only 3.5 years of experience. The idea of passing the type of interview that you're going to have for an experience for a role that's looking for 8 or more years of experience is unlikely. It's rough. These are intense experiences. These are intense interviews. Anyone can see this when looking through a job website like LinkedIn or Indeed and see how prevalent senior positions are compared to mid-level or junior positions, hence the reverse pyramid. Almost all the opportunity is gate-kept behind 5 to 10 years of experience and often an extraordinary talent for writing code and understanding fundamental CS concepts. The reason for this is simple, though. I mean, senior developers are way more productive. It's not even close. An entry-level developer is not going to write good code, and they're going to rack up lots of technical debt, and a senior is probably going to have to come in and fix their work afterwards anyway. So neither big companies nor small companies are inclined to hire less experienced people. An apprentice mason, for example, may not lay as many bricks as cleanly, but the wall still gets built and it's strong as a result of the bricks and mortar themselves being reliable. However, within software, which is not a linear progress, if that wall were a software project, it might never get finished. Or they might lay the final brick only to realize that that brick invalidates a tremendous amount of the previous work. Timelines for software production are never sensible. A good rule of thumb is however long you think it's going to be, go ahead and multiply that by 3 just to protect yourself against the inevitable bugs that will come up. Next, let's talk about the bottom of the pyramid. If you're not willing to put in at least 3,000 hours, don't even get started. And 3,000 hours is just my barrier. For you, it might be 5,000, or maybe if you're really talented, a bit less. I began studying right after returning from Wuhan, China in 2019. I knew the pandemic was coming, so I quit my part-time jobs at the time and threw myself into software 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. I hit about 1,600 hours during that time, about 5.5 months, and then I got my first professional role. It was a shit job, working 60 plus hours a week for 32 grand a year and no benefits, and a wild lunatic for a CEO who he would use me and the lead dev as emotional sponges to complain about his boring life in the Midwest. I worked that job for 7 months before we all got laid off. The company imploded. But by the end of that, I had just about exceeded the 3,000 hour mark. And then that opened the door for me. That professional experience on my resume was critical. And then I was able to get my first real position in the industry. The previous shit job was just me setting foot at the very bottom of the pyramid, the sharpest point. This job was my first real step up the pyramid. And I call it real only because it was decent pay, 72 grand after a lot of negotiation. Good benefits, work from home for a well-known Fortune 100 company, and it looks great on a resume, even though the job itself was a disaster. That pay, however, was still half of what I consider a success in the industry, and my role was buried under 1,000 layers of incompetent management, corporate bureaucracy, and projects that moved at a ludicrously slow pace while using technology that lacked any real value in the industry. And of course, it was just as unstable as the last position. 2 years in, myself, a large part of my team, and my boss all got laid off. And that brings me to today. Having failed probably about 24 interviews in the last few months, again, many of those I simply wasn't qualified for, I'm beginning to wonder if this is an industry I can succeed in. If no one's willing to give a mid-level engineer a chance, then I can never really gain the experience I need to become senior. At this point, the experience I need can only be gotten within enterprise level project and through the guidance of extremely experienced engineers. I can't go from mid-level to senior working on personal projects. The projects will just never be complex enough. I'll never encounter the enormous variety and nuance of problems and to overcome those problems that I will in a professional environment. And at this point, I don't know if I'm being persistent or stubborn. Should I submit another 1,000 applications and inevitably have a lot more failed interviews? Or should I say pivot to tech sales? I actually had an interview for a tech sales position just the other day. And frankly, I've always been told that I might do well in sales because I'm pretty charismatic. And right at the end of the interview, the CEO just offered me the job. He was like, you can start next week if you want it. I told him that I still have a lot of other engineering prospects, but if those prospects don't pan out, for example, this coming week, I've got 5 more interviews. 4 of them are for one company, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th round of one company. And then I've got another interview for a bank. But if those don't pan out, I probably will go into sales, even though, you know, I don't have a lot of interest in that, but it is what it is. You need a job at the end of the day. If there's still nothing in a few months when my lease ends in May, I'll probably leave the country, honestly, just to radically reduce my cost of living. The next real point I want to make is that this is a game. Come ready to win or go home. And this is probably the most practical advice I can give people coming into this industry or who want to come into the industry. If you want to climb this pyramid, number one, the most valuable thing you can have is experience. Get a job, any job. It doesn't matter. Even if the job's shit, even if the technology is useless, even if the company implodes, having that professional experience on the resume is almost as significant as having a 4-year bachelor's degree in CS. I don't have a CS degree, but once I had that professional experience on my resume, nobody cared about me not having a degree anymore. So for at least the first few years, you have to prove to companies that you can work professionally, and no personal projects don't count. Nobody cares. And freelance work, ironically, it would only matter if it was extremely successful. And if you're extremely successful in freelance work, then you're probably not looking for a full-time job anyway, are you? Next is networking. Again, do you recognize, I'm not talking about hard skills here. I'm talking about getting that professional experience just to prove that you're not useless. Number 2 is networking. Climbing that pyramid is like finding a secret island that you can only get to if you already know the way. Your chances of even getting your resume seen by a human being is nearly zero without having someone you know in the company who can personally deliver your resume into the hands of hiring managers. Networking got me both of my last jobs. The thousands of applications I submitted got me nothing. Next is popular technologies. You have to accept that the market wants what it wants, and you have to lean in that direction. And yes, it's entirely likely that you will occasionally waste your time studying something that people say they want, but they don't actually. For me, that was cloud computing. It took hundreds of hours of studying for me to attain the 4 certifications I have, 2 for Amazon, 2 for Google Cloud. But those certifications aren't worth the digital paper they're printed on. Nobody cares about them. I mean, my resume, it hasn't made a lick of difference having those certifications. It's something that companies claim that they want, but when it actually comes to hiring people, they don't give a shit. Finally, and this is the ultimate kick in the balls in terms of practical advice, and I'm sorry to do this to you, but you have to grind algorithms. If you have a natural talent in math, then maybe only a few hundred practice challenges are required. If you're not so math inclined like myself, expect this to be a permanent fixture in your life, a habit that you take up and maintain throughout the entirety of your career. At least 25% of the interviews I fail as a result of being hit with an algorithm challenge that just goes right over my head. Hell, sometimes it's written so complexly that I don't even have the reading comprehension to understand the question, never mind the math skills. The reason that this is such an insult is because you will never realistically have cause to use any of these fancy sorting algorithms or data structures. And in any real world scenario where it's complex enough that you might need something really nuanced, you'll have huge amounts of time to study a focused solution for that particular problem, and you'll likely even be collaborating with multiple engineers on said solution. So a test to see if you can pull that solution out of your ass under pressure in 6 minutes or less is totally unrelated to your ability to do the actual job, and it's just a lazy way for companies to filter out 90% of people. And yes, I have had interview assessments that gave me as little as 3 minutes per LeetCode style question. 3 minutes. Completely unreasonable. But in the end, keep in mind before trying to enter tech that you'll work harder than you've ever worked before. And this is all mental, not physical. And you can say what you want about the David Goggins of the world, but I will die on this hill. Mental challenge is more difficult than physical challenge. We can all agree that doing planks and lifting weights is difficult. Running is difficult. Fatigue makes cowards of men is the saying. But slamming your head up against a mental challenge for thousands and thousands of hours with no guarantee of, forget about success, no guarantee of progress, that takes an exceptional level of discipline and commitment. You're going to experience depths of frustration and tedium that you didn't think were possible. And you'll need an embarrassment of luck to land your first couple of rolls. But even if all of that fails, remember, failure doesn't define you as a person. And if nothing else, you've learned a fascinating, powerful knowledge base that will better help you understand this modern world and how it works. And that is of intrinsic value to your life. So be sure to subscribe and like for more, and take care.